right, hi everyone. Welcome to this fun lunchtime session where we're going to learn all about what happens when your apps and UIs get struck by lightning, the design system, and all the good stuff that happens as a result of it. My name is Karupa Chinnathambi. I'm the product manager for the design systems team at Salesforce. And these slides are always, things I never quite know what to put there. Okay, let's adjust the volume a bit. Okay, is it better now? Not really, okay. All right. So is the volume better at this point for you in the back? Is the volume better, not better? 1, 2, 3, 4? Not better at all, okay. I can definitely start screaming in a little bit to make it more clear, but that might be painful for the people in the front rows, so we'll wait for the official solution in a little bit. It's getting better now? Oh, it's perfect. All right. Now we got the obligatory tech challenges out of the way early. It's only smooth sailing from here on out. So my name is Karupa Chinnathambi. I'm the product manager for the SLDS team at Salesforce. And I never quite know what to put here, mostly because I don't know what's interesting. So instead what I did is I use emojis a whole lot, and my colleagues have told me that in the past that I use it probably a little too much. So I wrote a script a while ago that just went through all my emails and picked the most common emojis that I use frequently. And I figure you can tell a lot about a person by knowing what emojis to use. So I figured instead of talking to you and boring you about my life, I give you 12 pictures that probably represent more about me than you can probably hear from what I'm about to say. So with that, let's get to the more serious, more interesting parts of our conversation. We don't have a lot of time. We're going to be covering a lot of ground. I want to first talk about what is the design system, what is SLDS, and then shift over to tying it in with some of the new announcements we've been seeing for the past few months around web components and styling and just a new way of building apps. And then we'll wrap things up with a Q&A. Now, the Q&A is going to be pretty exciting because we have a pretty special guest star. I'm not going to tell you who it is yet, but just have your cameras ready. That's all I'm going to say. So, of course, it's a Salesforce talk, so here's the obligatory forward-looking statement. Now, I find these to be great family exercises. We can read this out loud to your family during dinner time, for example, so I won't dilute the experience. So I'll just leave this on for a second, and then we'll go to the main topic right here. So how many of you here are familiar with SLDS, the design system, and have used it in the past? All right, so most of you. Great. So what I want to do first is there are also a lot of hands that did not go up, so I'm going to just take a quick detour and give a quick overview of what the design system is and what it provides and how it kind of helps you build great UIs. And instead of boring you with the definition, which I will do in a little bit, I want to just take a step back and talk about just UIs in general. How do we build software? What are the stages that often tend to take the most time for us? And so the way I broke it down is into these 3 phases. The first one is the ideation research phase. This is the part where for every product we build, we ask ourselves these existential questions on who are we building for, what is the problem we're trying to solve, the kind of base work you need to do first. And then we get to the second and third stages, which is design and engineering. This almost a cyclical world where you have this work of design, which kind of helps you answer what you're building, and engineering, which is all about how to build once you've figured out what you want to build. And so the design system, the Lightning design system especially, has a lot of guidance, a lot of areas where it helps you basically make progress through every stage of this area. And so the definition is this. If I had to give a brief overview, SLDS is basically provides you with UI-centric resources for building efficiently on the Salesforce platform. And I want to emphasize the building efficiently on the Salesforce platform bit because for the most part, when we're building UIs, we're not working on a blank canvas. It's not going to be working in isolation. It's going to be part of what our customers tend to view as the overall Salesforce experience. So here I have an example of a very popular page. And you can tell very quickly, without even noticing the giant Salesforce logo in the top left corner, there's a Salesforce UI. Whether it's the placement of UI elements on the page, whether it is the colors and the fonts that are being used, or even the icons, there's a very distinct look and feel that makes it very clear that what we're looking at is Salesforce-specific UI. And what the design system provides is it provides you both guidance as well as implementation details on how you can kind of mimic this familiarity and clarity and efficiency as part of the UIs that you end up building. So let's take a look at how exactly the design system helps across all these various stages, starting with the ideation research phase. So one of the biggest things, and one of my favorite parts, what the design system provides is guidelines. If you had to imagine the design system and the apps you build on it to be kind of like a very popular and big amusement park, The guidelines are kind of the map you get at the very beginning to help you figure out where you want to go, how to optimize your path across what you're building, and also, if you're pressed for time, where you can cut corners if needed. And so some of the popular topics we provide a lot of guidance around is like accessibility, something to take very seriously. How does data entry work in the Salesforce environment? What is search, navigation? So to help you answer all these big picture questions on examples with do's and don'ts and implementation details, which are really good to get figured out up front so that you aren't spending time later on trying to map things to things that may not work. Next is the design phase. Now, we provide a lot of guidance for designers, but this is more of a developer-centric talk, so I'm going to focus on one area in particular that I'm particularly very happy with. One of the things we provide is, in the past, if you had to mock up your UI or prototype and validate what's going on, you might have had to write code. That is often pretty heavyweight and not the most ideal way of getting things done. So what we provide is a Sketch UI toolkit. Sketch is a really popular tool that many designers use. Many of you may use it as well. As part of just building and constructing UI, for every common UI element you might encounter at Salesforce, we basically have a visual representation that you can then use to mock up and test how your UIs would look without ever having to write a lot of code. So it's a great way to kind of get up and running without having to involve your larger team as part of just prototyping and figuring things out. Now, here's the fun part. Here's the engineering part, which is probably the one where we spend a lot of our time. It's also where most of our customers end up seeing the results of what the design system provides. So the first thing, how many of you here are familiar with tokens? All right, many of you are. And so, in a world where you're building UI, you can always hard code values, you can always hard code colors and spacing and things like that. But the design system, it evolves, it changes, we provide new values as part of every release. If you hard coded it, you don't get along for the ride. You don't get all the changes we're talking about. So tokens is a way for you to kind of abstract away some of the implementation details, while still building your UI in a way that still is scalable and it works and kind of evolves with the Salesforce design system as we make updates going forward. And the next thing is component blueprints. So many of you probably just use components out of the box as part of just building your experience. But there's also many of you who probably want to build your own custom experience. And instead of starting from scratch, instead of having to reverse engineer and figure things out on how the visuals are designed, we provide you with a lot of HTML and CSS for almost every component that we provide a blueprint for. So that way you have accessibility and responsiveness, all the good things that you might have to figure out on your own. We provide it out of the box for you, and you can use it via what we call the component blueprints. And lastly, it's tooling. Tooling is a big part that we spend a lot of time in. We're going to be spending a lot more time in the future. Some of you may have caught the talk yesterday by John Earl, Matt Holland, and Billy Ma, where we talked about the new Visual Studio Code extension we're providing for SLDS, where instead of building your UIs and finding after the fact that things are not working properly, things are broken, we're actually going to give you guidance as part of you writing code on where you can best use the design system and where you can optimize further. So, this is the beginning of the many tools we want to build and release in the future, but it's optimizing the workflow between developers and designers. So stay tuned for a lot of that guidance. So the design system overall provides you with guidance every step of the way, from ideation to design and engineering, and also for the various roles in your team that might be interested in any one part of it. But like I mentioned earlier, though, what I'm talking about is a very small subset of what the design system provides. Now, I can spend all day talking about everything that SLDS provides, but there are better talks by my colleagues in the past that go into much greater detail on this. So if you want to learn more, visit the website or watch some of the previous talks we've given on this. So instead, I want to shift focus on the part that I think most of you are very interested in, which is really the future of styling. What are we doing with SLDS? What are we doing here? And also, more importantly, why are we doing this? So, as you saw the announcements, Lightning Web Components, it's big, it's cool, it's the new way of building UIs for Salesforce. And just one more friendly reminder, we saw the forward-looking statement earlier, but this is more human readable. I want to say that what we're working on, what I'm about to tell you right now, is things we're actively working on as well. We're pretty sure that this is the direction we want to go in, but things may change, so just want to give you a heads up that we'll be communicating constantly. Only part of our team is here because the rest of them are still actively working on building out what I'm about to show you. So just a quick friendly heads up on that. So when you're building UIs today, you really have three choices. You have Classic, which many of you have been using before. Then you have the Lightning experience, which is really Aura, which has been the reality for the past few years. And then what we announced in December of last year, which is Lightning Web Components, this new way of building UIs that is based on web standards. And some of the things that are just trying to design UIs for a world where you're no longer dealing with static pages. So this is what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the Lightning Web Components world. Now, there are many talks that have already happened at TDX on what web components are and what makes them interesting, so I'm not going into too much detail. But what I do want to just mention is that, like I emphasized earlier, Lightning Web Components are built around web standards, which standards like custom elements, templates, shadow DOM, CSS custom properties, decorators, modules, and many, many more. But the things that, for our scenarios, for our styling-related purposes that are interesting, is shadow DOM and CSS custom properties. And the reason why it's interesting is this, because as part of Lightning Web Components, taking a strong dependency on it, we have a new and improved way of styling that's really optimized for the very complex web apps that we all tend to build today. Now, I feel like by saying that, I should qualify what exactly has changed with web apps between what we had before and what we have now. So here's a quick aside. Many of you probably used the web for a very long period of time, and you probably lived through this, where the web started out not as the web we see today. It was very document-centric. It had large amounts of text and images and blue links that when visited turned purple and they couldn't change them ever. And when you navigated between them, you just had other pages with large amounts of text and images and so on. And to pick some examples of it, even though today we evolved beyond it, but sites like Wikipedia still pay homage to that kind of a style where you have document-centric content. Craigslist, another common example. And it doesn't have to be just document sites, even sites like Amazon that provide a whole host of functionality when you decompose it, or really just pages where you have a lot of content and you navigate to other pages with just a lot of content. That's pretty much how the web has been for a very long time. That's also how the technologies that power the web have been really optimized for as well. But as things evolved, as our expectations evolved, as technologies evolved, the kind of apps you see on the web now are also different. They're also app-like with a strong focus on user experience. Examples are, you probably have hundreds of them from your day-to-day usage. Google Maps is a very popular example where you're interacting with a page. You don't really feel like you're navigating between pages. You're just using a user experience that's all optimized for finding things and helping you get around. Twitter, another great example. Pinterest, all these are very popular sites that tend to follow this new model where apps are built not in terms of like individual pages, but more focused on content and how to best present them. And if I want to go all meta, here's a version of Google Slides that I used to actually build the slides you're seeing here. And that is another example of a site that is considered modern. There's a name for all these things. We've been calling them single-page apps for a while, also abbreviated as SPA. SPA sounds pretty cool. But the thing that I want to focus on, though, is not necessarily the navigation model, because it is kind of cool that your DOM stays constant. You're navigating between elements in the page that are changing, but your overall structure is pretty much static. The more interesting part is this, is that your pages are no longer just monolithic blobs of HTML. They might render that way, but the way you build them is you compose them of very much smaller elements. So what might seem like a very simple piece of UI might actually be made up of dozens and dozens of smaller pieces, which each have their own little world of functionality, their own CSS, their own HTML, their own JavaScript. They're very self-contained. So really the word of the day is composability. Modern apps that we're talking about are composable. They're made up of reusable elements where smaller parts are combined to create larger parts, which is a very big difference from how Yahoo.com might have been in like late 1990s, for example. And the example I like to use is the classic examples is like the Matryoshka dolls, where you have a doll within a doll within a doll, and this is how web apps these days, especially modern ones, can almost be represented. Now, here's the rub: CSS was not really designed for a composable world, and one of the big reasons is the C in CSS it stands for cascade. It's really the whole feature about CSS makes it great is that you can have a style that influences another style and then has other styles that get influenced by it. Like that's how it was designed. So if you're building something that has hierarchy, which most documents do, CSS was fantastic. But if you don't, it becomes more complicated. And that's where, when you have a composable world, we need style encapsulation. And the old world of CSS simply doesn't work. And so here's an example where I have an H2 element. As you can see, it's being influenced by many, many styles. That is something that simply will not work. So if we need encapsulation, we really need two things to be specific. We need the ability for styles to be self-contained to just a reusable element. Reusability is significantly hampered if you have to bring in not only the element you care about, but also like 5 other elements that go along with it. And the supported mechanism to set and override styles as well. We want reusability, but we also want to maintain some level of customization that you may desire as part of what you want to do. Now, what do we do here? The default answer really is, let's write JavaScript. The web these days, like for every solution out there, you can just write JavaScript and you can pretty much solve it. But fortunately, there's a slightly better solution out there, and that is web standards. Web standards to the rescue. Cody probably, represents the same feeling all of us have when we use web standards to solve problems, as opposed to some library or some hacked up solution found on Stack Overflow. And let's not say we've never done that before. And so for the two things, the two solutions are, for self-contained styles, Shadow DOM is your solution. And the supported mechanism for being able to set an override styles and a parent, that's provided by CSS custom properties, which you may also have them referenced as CSS variables. So both names are pretty popular. So let's talk about what Shadow DOM is. So, I don't know if many of you attended a session just before this, but the Shadow DOM is really as part of the web components standard. It's a way for you to kind of encapsulate your functionality of an element and have it be pretty much isolated from everything else. Think of it as almost like an island with no real way to interact with what's available there. So what's nice about it is this isolation protects your CSS from any breaking changes, any global styles, or any of the side effects of cascading. So whatever happens inside that particular element, it's like Las Vegas. What happens there stays there. Nothing ever goes out. And so what this means is that it doesn't matter how complex your UI is. If you have something you want to add into it, you can be pretty confident that when you add it to your page, it'll still look exactly the way you intended for it to do, which was not a guarantee you could really make in the past. But with Shadow DOM, you can actually be much closer to giving a 100% guarantee on that. So that's the encapsulation part of styling. The second part is customization. So one of the big changes is, because you can't really use the cascade, you can't reach in and make changes that you want to do, there are other ways that you have available instead. And one of those ways is by using custom properties. Now, long story short, custom properties are just like variables in JavaScript. You declare them, and then you can just use them wherever you want. So in this example here, I have as a root selector, I have a variable called myAlign, whose value is set to myCenter. And in my container style rule, I'm just using it as part of my align items and justify content values. And if I ever were to change the value of myAlign to, let's say, from center to unset, it'll automatically apply to both the align items and justify content properties as well. So that's really how CSS custom properties work. Now, the takeaway is this. With the Shadow DOM, you get style encapsulation. And with custom properties, you have the ability to customize the parts of the UI that have been exposed for customization. And that part is actually the interesting part, because not all UI can be customized. Only the UI that the developer has designated as being something that we want to be modified will be modifiable. So there's a little bit of control from both the developer side as well as on your side on what you want to modify and what you can actually modify and get away with. And so that brings us to the part that is probably relevant to all the UIs that we build, which is evolving SLDS. The SLDS is probably the primary way that many of you expose a lot of the UI in the Salesforce product. And as part of all the changes we're talking about, that means SLDS can't be static either. We have to kind of adapt to represent the best ways of styling in a world where we are dealing with encapsulation and limited customization by having custom properties. And so the goal overall is this. We want to make sure this all works with minimal changes to your workflow. And I broke this up into 3 categories of changes. One is for the end user. If you're an end user, the Salesforce experience will still look familiar and feel much faster. I'll go into more detail on that. If you're an admin, everything will be the same, just better. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty confident about that. If you're a developer, though, there'll be some changes you need to make, and we'll walk through what those changes are going to be. So let's start with the end user case. So as an end user, what we're talking about here are implementation details. So as an end user, nothing should change. So here you have a UI before in a world where you do not have Lightning Web Components. Then you have a world after where you do have Web Components. And the UI is identical, because that's the goal. The goal is not to have end users have to think about it, be aware of it, or have to just learn something new. We want to make sure it's all completely familiar, transparent under the covers. But what will be familiar, though, is that there's going to be a little performance benefit as part of moving to this. So imagine a world like today where we have no real idea of what UI might be used, or what styles or icons or fonts might be used by a particular page. Since we have no idea of what needs to be done, we load everything up front, like pretty much everything in the kitchen sink that's related to styling is pretty much loaded for you, downloaded and in memory, even though your app might only need like a small subset of it. So you're loading a lot of content. So here's some audience participation time. Here's a quiz. So the way I like to approximate all the stuff that's being loaded is by using the static resource from SLDS as a gauge for all the content. So fonts, styles, icon, etc. So as a quick show of hands, how large are all the compressed static resource content that gets loaded per page? Is it 150 kilobytes? Okay, a few hands went up. Is it 5 megabytes? Is it 10 megabytes? Okay, a lot of people didn't vote, which I'm assuming means that, they know the answer, they don't want to give it away. The answer is 5 megabytes. So when you first load a page for the first time, the compressed size of everything that's loaded, gzip, for example, is 5 megabytes of content. Even though your page might use probably a tenth of it, maybe a hundredth of it. And that's a downside, with the old approach. With the new approach, though, as part of encapsulation, we have much greater control over what exactly your page will need and what will need to be downloaded. So exactly what your application needs is exactly what gets sent to the user, which is a massive performance gain because mainly in terms of what you're downloading and how much memory is being taken up by just things being loaded in memory. And as you know, we're doing mobile as a big investment for the company as well. And so these are benefits that may not be immediately evident on our very powerful laptops, but on mobile devices, Android and iPhones, you'll see this readily apparent as a huge benefit. The admin scenario. For the admin scenario, which I like to call like the low-code scenario, you'll still get all the great functionality you've used before. You'll still be able to use the branding and themes editor as part of the setup experience. You'll still be able to use the Lightning App Builder to build your UI, use drag and drop tools, have a rich list of components so you can just make it work. And then here, when you're extending your app, you get some benefits though, because there are too many cases that we all see frequently, at least at Salesforce, where you go to the App Exchange, you found a really cool component library, you add it to your page, then everything is broken because the styles that component library brought in might have interacted negatively with some other styles you might have on your page. And that was never fun. But with this new world of encapsulation, extending your app becomes more predictable, where hopefully it'll be a thing of the past, where adding new content will cause your page to then behave erratically. Now we get to the developer section, which is the interesting part. So we talked earlier that tokens is one of the supported ways we have for being able to modify the look and feel of your application. You provide it, if you use it, you can just make, evolve with the design system. In this new world, as you can imagine, the Aura tokens of the past are now mapped to CSS custom properties. So the code you might have written when using global tokens might look a little bit like this. You might have background color using the token function in the past. In the new world, you still get to do the similar background color value, but instead use the web standards-based var syntax for being able to call the appropriate token instead. Still have the ability to be able to define your own tokens. So you might have a token bundle in the Aura world. In this new world, you're able to bucket it up together and also have it in terms of custom properties, where you can still get the same functionality that you want. Now, here's where there are certain things that you might have been able to do in the past that'll be more difficult to do, if not very if not almost impossible. And that is the style encapsulation provided by LWC, making unsupported CSS changes, they will no longer work. So let me give you an example. Here I have a Lightning Web component, that takes a text area element, and I have a class called bad idea. And inside this component, I have an element called text area, and I want to style it. In this new world, because of Shadow DOM encapsulation, I have no way from the outside of being able to access the internals of my component. I cannot access the text area element, for example, and be able to modify its height, background color, and font color. The only way would really be if, as the implementer of the text area component, I have some custom properties defined for these particular values, which I can override it. But the thing I do want to clarify, though, is this is actually supported for other use cases. For the general Salesforce experience, where the goal is to maintain consistency and clarity and efficiency and all of that, it is something that we want to constrain how we style. But for communities where the goal is different, many of you probably use the communities product, where the goal is really to be able to control every single pixel that is put up on screen, we are working on a solution with them on how to enable greater customization as well. So we're working on both ends of this problem, and hopefully we'll be able to share something very soon on how to basically pick the right one that meets your needs. So really the takeaway is we're working actively on this. The SLDS and the components teams are making sure that all of the base components used out of the box are following this new model. We're working across the ecosystem to make sure that all of our partners and all of the teams within Salesforce and outside of Salesforce also are aware of how to migrate to this new world. So we'll be sharing more at Dreamforce, at various blog posts and various conversations, and this so on. We'll be talking a lot, essentially. And so, and as promised earlier, I want to leave a lot of time for questions. And so let's give a welcome and get your cameras ready for our guest presenter on the Q&A, Brendan Ferrua, one of the original authors of the design system and who also played a key role in implementing the new changes we're talking about right now. So. Where's the microphone? So yeah, feel free to use the
amazing. Thank you.
So feel free to use the microphones to present. Everything gets recorded, so therefore we want to make sure it's there. If not, we'll repeat the question as well. But don't feel shy. we're mostly friendly.
And if you are shy, you can come up here after the fact and we can talk to you in person.
Yes.
Oh, this is awkward. Nothing?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that all it's telling us.
Okay, right here.
Okay, so the question was, are there any plans to create an Adobe XD version of the Sketch Kit as opposed to the Sketch one? That's a good idea. You know, I know as a team we've talked about this before, and we'll just, you know, that's a great idea. Like it's something that we want to do, and we'll work on it.
Yeah, like right now we have the Sketch kit, and they're very time consuming to build and maintain, especially as every release we're adding more things to it. So I definitely think it's a great idea because we know that there's a lot of designers that are working in different type of tools and everything. But yeah, so the goal is to really kind of align those UI kits to make sure that we're serving the right tools. So yeah, I would keep an eye out for that, but it would be like time thing. So
There's a person at the microphone. We'll come to you next.
Yeah, I may have just misunderstood kind of what you were talking about, but when you were showing like the bad idea and like making custom, making changes
Yep.
to an actual component, so will that not be supported when the shadow dump? Because I feel like I'm doing that right now, like in my communities, but that's going to not be supported?
In communities, it will be supported. You know,
Okay.
we're working on a solution that will solve it for the community's case.
Okay.
And right now, no, until web components and the shadow DOM is fully turned on, everything you've been doing in the past will still work. In the near future, though, we will move to a world where the native shadow DOM and some of the artificial shadow DOM constructs that the Lightning framework provides, they'll be turned on at some point. You know, and then at that point, you'll have to basically adjust your UI to make sure that you're not doing anything unsupported.
Okay.
So it's future facing because nothing changes for you today. But it'd be beneficial as part of you building new UI, for example, to keep these things in mind so that when we do migrate to that world, the transition will be completely smooth.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Yep. There's a question in the front? No. Oh, not anymore. Oh, perfect.
When will the dash dash names be deprecated as, I don't want to say, threatened?
Pardon me? Oh, sorry.
Okay, you said the dash name, so the custom properties?
No, you removed basically the dash dash with
Oh, the underscore?
Yeah, and when will the old style go away?
So the plan is if we're speaking into web components, based on the fact that we're building a new version, they will not be there. So everything will be aligned and have the underscore instead of the dash dash. For those that don't understand what that question is, basically our class names that indicated a modifier class that's applied to an element was dash dash at one point. If you comment out your code, and because it's XML, it causes a compiling error. So we changed it to underscore. But that code is still in the code base, but in V3, which is the new version for web components, it will not be there. It will only be there if you're building in Aura components.
There's some use cases for the bad idea that are pretty common, like I want to change the fill color of a lightning icon component. Is there a path forward you and the component teams are thinking for things like that?
Absolutely. Like, for all the common scenarios, we want to make sure it's fully supported. We'll either, continue the approach with variants that we've had in the past, and also maybe for fill color specifically, use the custom properties approach also, where we will provide customization options so we can use it directly as opposed to waiting.
Yeah, I can elaborate on that a little bit. So in the new version of the framework, that's going to be sympathetic to shadow components. A lot of these scenarios that we've seen you as developers want to accomplish, like changing the color of the SVG in Lightning Icon, for example, we've actually taken all of that feedback and we're baking that functionality into the new version. So you'll be able to use, it will be a CSS custom property solution. So if you have a component that is the owner of Lightning Icon, you have ownership of anything that is composed inside of that component. So your parent component, all of the children's that are slotted in, you can access that, and then you'll have a CSS custom property that is associated, basically namespace to each one of those icons. And then at the host level of that parent component, you'll be able to modify the colors of anything inside because you own it.
And that would, like, those variable names would just be documented in, like, the component documentation, I guess?
Yeah, yeah. As things start like evolving and rolling out, and we start aligning on some decisions, we'll be publishing developer documentation of how to do this, and the SLDS team in particular is going to be publishing more external documentation on how we're going to build version 3 of SLDS, and hopefully that will advise you as external developers the way that we build it, hopefully taking those standards and implementing it into your own best practices.
Yes. It depends on what kind of changes you're trying to make. If the change you're trying to, oh, so the question was, what are some of the workarounds that can be done in the future when you're using components that may not be fully supported in our new world? And so it depends exactly on the kind of question, what customizations you're trying to make. If the customizations are, as Brandon mentioned, supported, and, there won't be any work you need to do. But if it's something that's very custom, only for your particular scenario that we don't expose a custom property for or have another mechanism for, in those cases, your option would be to go custom. Have something custom go through it. But the thing is, it's also a two-way conversation. Like, we'd love to know, like, what changes you're trying to make, so that way we can take that as a team, take that feedback, and maybe go, that's actually a valid scenario that we need to support officially, and then we'll make sure it's rolled out as well. So, like, that's one of the things that's part of us talking about it very early on, as opposed to, in a little bit when it's officially out, is we want to give a chance for all of you to just think about the information, give us feedback on what you like and don't like, and also just let us know what you like to change as well, because the best time to change things is right when things are being designed and being prototyped and built. And so that's one of the reasons why. So if you let us know, like, what you're trying to change once we get the first couple of them out there for testing and playing with, we'd love to, see if we can accommodate that.
Yeah, just to add on to that. So all the out-of-the-box components that you're probably used to using, like the Lightning namespace components, as we make this transition into web components, we're going to expose a very declarative API as it relates to styling. So you'll see in the developer documentation all of the properties that you're able to change inside of that component. But that's not to say it's not limited to that, because the way that we're approaching this is, at the end of the day, we're trying to style this UI for millions and millions of developers internally and externally. So we have to remain relatively conservative on, like, how much we expose from the get-go. And I think once we start seeing some of the use cases that you're trying to change and implement or customize, we'll expose that property to essentially be customized within the component. So say, for example, in, say, like Lightning button, we don't want you changing the size of it. This is all hypothetical. I'm not saying that this is what we're going to do. Because at the end of the day, like, we want our buttons, we've done research and our buttons need to be a certain size, but you have a very specific use case that you want to do it. And then another person over here has another very specific use case that's wanting to do that as well. That's the type of feedback that we're going to want in, like, an open channel of communication. And then we can easily expose that, because the way that it's going to be architected is we're going to be scoping these CSS properties to essentially be there, but they're going to be private. And then we can expose them to the essentially the global, not global, but the host namespace of that component. So now you have access to it and you can kind of go and do whatever you want with it. So just think of it as, like, it's going to be an evolution as we come across how people are going to be using this, without kind of saying, hey, here's everything, go have fun, and then that tends to cause issues in the long run. So.
What's the best way to provide feedback?
I think the idea exchange is obviously one area that our product owner looks at
That
and
works really
provides
well,
feedback. But we have all of we have our open source community. So on GitHub, our framework is open source. So you can find our team in our issues tracker. We just open sourced the LWC framework. So if there's something specific issues that you're having there, reach out on those issue trackers, because those were the core members of the teams are going to be interacting with customers.
Yep. But any commenting on Twitter, we track all the social media channels, so we'll make sure that it gets the right people. So whatever mechanism works for you outside of the ones that Brandon mentioned, feel free to use this as well. It'll be fine. All right. With that, we'll be at the booth today, downstairs at the the SLDS booth. So if you have any further questions, feel free to drop by, and we'll be happy to answer some more questions.
Or come up here.
Or come up here, yes. We have 5 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your TDX.
Right.